Joe Burrow addressed the media for the first time, well, in a long time. He spoke on his contract extension, on what's going on with Jonah Williams, and more. We'll break down the Bengals franchise quarterback's comments.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm your host, Jake Lisco. He's your host, James Rapine. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and you can subscribe to this podcast on YouTube or anywhere you get your podcasts for daily coverage of your Cincinnati Bengals. And that includes Joe Burrow, who somehow, James, despite our normal tendencies to talk about him whenever we can, the face of the Bengals franchise, one of the faces of the NFL, Joe Burrow, we've managed to not talk about him very much in the last, month, maybe? Focused on the draft. That's obviously not a very quarterback-heavy topic, despite them adding some weapons or protection for him, that sort of thing. But when Joe Burrow speaks, we obviously listen and listen closely. And James, you were obviously there. You had the opportunity to ask a few of those questions and hear him in person. And a lot of really interesting tidbits in the Joe Burrow presser. None more interesting, I would say, than the contract extension comments. And I think that's where we start.
No doubt, because that's the question sort of looming over the franchise, looming over the offseason. As much as we could discuss T. Higgins or Jamar Chase or the offseason additions, and they're big, Jonah Williams, which we will talk about those things, the draft, that entire draft class of 2023 is not worth what that Joe Burrow contract extension is value-wise in reality or to this franchise. And I think that that's obviously where we start. In Joe Burrow's comments, interesting, because he didn't just pass the buck and give the generic, that's up to my agent. I'm letting my agent handle that. We're not going to negotiate publicly. He could have said that and just been done. And instead, he acknowledged that he was involved in contract talks. Instead, he said, quote, "I'm pretty clear on what I want in the contract and what I think is best for myself and the team. We are on the road to making that happen." And I think that that's encouraging for about 50,000 reasons, not just the fact that this deal needs to get done for the franchise and for him and all of those things, but obviously all of the other deals that could potentially fall in line afterward. So I think Burrow is aware of his power and wants to get paid and wants long-term security. And at the same time, this, whether it's realistic or not, Jake, is going to open up the door now to the narrative of Joe Burrow might structure that very team-friendly, go the Mahomes style, even though it sounds like Mahomes is going to renegotiate his deal this offseason, or maybe take a little bit of a hometown discount to keep the band together. Like that chatter, which had kind of gone away a bit, I think that's going to come back now after these comments.
Yeah, and we'll see. I'm very interested to see if that actually happens, right? Because there's not much of a precedent in the NFL for superstar quarterbacks at the top of their position taking a clear discount. Like even Mahomes' deal at the time, while it was seen as team friendly, it was also seen as, holy crap, that's a lot of money. 10 years. Wow, what a commitment. And I mean, it was market setting at the time, was it not? Didn't it set the market at the time?
Yes, it was, but it was looking at like the cap hits and everything like that, the structure, it was very clear that he did them a favor, even in the moment. Yeah. But you're right. It was a heck of a lot of money. Yes.
It was still a good contract for Mahomes at the time. And then since then, we've talked about on this podcast how there have been a number of really poor, from the owner's perspective, quarterback deals recently. Russell Wilson, one of those. Kyler Murray, one of those. Certainly Deshaun Watson, one of those. Like all of these contracts that have happened recently for quarterbacks that have really accelerated the quarterback market. And, you know, maybe this is just normal inflation. But prior to that, I don't think we were seeing these massive jumps to the point where, you know, the Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes deals now in retrospect look fantastic for those teams. And it's always the case, right? Like there's always some inflation, but the degree of that inflation, and I could be wrong about this. This is an intuition thing rather than a I've done the math thing. Feels like to me it's been a greater degree of inflation in recent years. So given that that's already happened, are we saying that Burrow's not going to reset the market? Because that would be shocking. And so if it's just a structure thing, then okay, sure. But you'd be surprised, right? Wouldn't you be surprised if Burrow's at least like per year didn't set the market at the quarterback position?
It's going to start with a 5. I would be shocked if it didn't. And so, yeah, why wouldn't it reset it? I agree with you. I think team friendly and Joe Burrow mean structure that bad boy so we can keep your friends around. And outside of that, I don't know how much is there. And just falling in line with that, he did say, whenever you have guys on the team that need to be paid, that's always on your mind when asked essentially about T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, etc. He said, you want that to be a focal point. And so we're working to make that happen. And so I do wonder, because Joe Burrow is unique. There's a reason he's been able to completely flip not just the franchise on its head, but the entire city of Cincinnati. And you mentioned it, NFL-wise, he's one of the biggest stars in the game. He's completely changed that franchise. And so maybe he does. Maybe he finds a way to be the point man for all 3 deals. And it just comes together and works. That's just unprecedented. I think that's fair to say. Unprecedented. Because guys have egos, right? Even you don't become Joe Burrow without an ego. Jamar Chase, T. Higgins without an ego. Guess who else has egos? Agents. And so to get everything to fall in line to where a team-friendly structure will work, I think it's far-fetched on the surface, but I wouldn't put it past Burrow. Much like being down 21-3 in an AFC title game against what many believed was the best team on the planet, and he got it done then, or insert the number of other times he's, caught us off guard and surprised us, or maybe it's not a surprise anymore. I'm not going to be surprised if he finds a way to make this work. That said, I agree with you. I think that's going to reset the market, but that doesn't mean he can't structure it a certain way and work on the years and work hand in hand. And that's the part of it that I think is interesting too, is it sounds like both sides think something's going to get done. And when you have that, and it's just kind of a matter of when, not if, you can really find ways to negotiate and make sure it's the best for both sides.
I think it's absolutely a when, not if. I am with you there. Like that's there's no if at all. It's just a when, and it's what is it going to look like? Is it going to be the 4-year, 5-year deal variety where they, being Burrow's camp, want to see, what's the future of inflation? Because his future is so secure. Some of these other quarterbacks have gotten big deals. Jalen Hurts, similar, had one major year of success, lost the Super Bowl, $51 million a year. Joe Burrow lost the Super Bowl, AFC Championship game in back-to-back years earlier in his contract than Jalen Hurts, although they are the same age. No, Burrow's actually older by 2 years. But it's hard to see him not eclipsing that number, right? So it'll be interesting to see what kind of model they follow, where the guarantees are, how they manage the guarantees, how they manage the proration over time. We talked with Andre Parada about this with his projected Burrow contract. That was an episode way back in the winter. If you want to go find that one, where we talked with Andre and broke down the different contract possibilities and what he projected as a good contract idea for Burrow. And this was before some of these other quarterback deals happened, so he probably would need to adjust it now since some other quarterback deals have come down since then. But you want to know a fun fact, James?
Go.
Currently, quarterbacks in the NFL that have a higher per year deal than Joe Burrow by virtue of the rookie wage scale and inflation: CJ Stroud, Trevor Lawrence, Bryce Young.
That's wild. That's wild. That
wage scale stuff,
even the second pick, huh? Yeah, just a few years later, the second pick still gets it. Yeah, and by the way, good for them. And that's the other part of this. He does have money, but he's about to get a whole lot more money. And I wouldn't put it past him, Jake. I wouldn't put it past him to take this weird team-friendly deal where people are like, what? CAA, who represents him, is like, what? What are you talking about, Joe? You're the biggest quarterback in the sport. You're going to be during this contract. And he's like, hey, this is what we're doing. I wouldn't
He
put
is
it past
involved,
him.
right? So
He's involved. I think that's very good news. If you're in camp, keep the band together.
mm-hmm. And he's got to be in camp, keep the band together, right? He's highly incentivized to do that.
Well, I would much rather throw to the Bengals receivers than any other group that they're going to see, at least in the AFC. I'm not even thinking about NFC, but at least in the AFC, I don't think there's a contending team that's in that mix. So, yeah, I think that if you're Joe Burrow, you're locked and loaded, and you feel good about yourself going into against any of these top playoff teams weapons wise. So let's continue this conversation. More takeaways from Joe Burrow. It's really the only time I think we're going to hear from him this offseason before training camp starts. So there's plenty to dissect, and we will do all of that coming up next, including, well, the shape Joe Burrow is in. And that's why today's show, it's brought to you by Built Bar. And I might have snuck Joe Burrow a Built Bar in the Bengals locker room. I can't confirm that, but I'm not going to deny it either. And he certainly is in great shape. I even joked with him about lazy Joe Burrow. He said, obviously he's been working out. You could see it. But I asked him, I was like, you haven't been working out, huh? And so whether you're working out a ton, whether you're not, whether you're just trying to get in better shape, or you need that post-workout protein punch, Built Bars are perfect for you. And you can check them out right now at built.com, BUILT.com. If you want to look at them in stores, go to your local Walmart, your local Sam's Club, and you can check them out there. They're covered in 100% real dark chocolate, high protein, low sugar, low calories, perfect for you, Joe Burrow, Dax Hill. Insert another player on the Bengals that is in better shape today than they were when the season ended. And so get yours at built.com, Sam's Club, and Walmart.
Want to talk about the kind of shape Joe Burrow is in? He did set the internet on fire yesterday. Headband Joe Burrow it's got to be one of the biggest engagement things I've seen on Bengals Twitter.
Yeah.
From every single demographic in the last, since the season ended, probably?
I mean, it was everywhere. Everywhere. And, and he sees it. I know might act like he doesn't. He sees it. And so he put out there the first day of school vibes with a couple more pictures. That absolutely, I think the internet was already on fire, and then it burned down, and they had to rebuild it. Good thing they rebuilt it quickly. But you're right, man. But that's the point, right? Like that's the point of this whole thing is what a guy of that magnitude, of that star, with that star power in the social media era, and he by far is the most popular Bengal, period. Like, not just in this decade or this, no, period. Like that, I don't think there's ever been a time. Now, you could say, well, it's because of social media and all of those things. That's fine. Still, most popular. But the point is someone with that star power that means that much to a franchise going to take a team-friendly deal or team-friendly discount or whatever you want to say, hometown discount? That's a major question, because he knows the power that he wields. And I guarantee you, it's, even though you want to win that bad and you want to keep everybody around, it's going to be hard to say, all right, well, let's make this a 5-1, or let's take a little bit off the top here, or it's simply, let's structure this a certain way, and that structure might not be as beneficial to my pocketbook long term.
Yeah, we'll see what it ends up being. I think he's going to get his money. I think that he's going to do what he can to help the team keep T. Higgins and Jamar Chase for another contract. That doesn't necessarily cost Joe Burrow any money at all, necessarily. The way they could do it, it just might mean he has to wait a little bit, or maybe he takes more of it up front in a big signing bonus. Who knows? Another fun fact, James, you mentioned most popular Bengal of all time, and social media is certainly a part of that. The quarterback position, a part of that as well. Who would you say is the second most popular Bengal of all time? Chad, right?
Chad, Anthony, Boomer, in that order, probably. Yeah. And Chad has the benefit of social media too. Lapham might be right after those guys, believe it or not. Might be ahead of Ken Anderson if I had to guess. And then you go kind of down the list. But if I had to rank it, that would probably be how I would rank it.
Yeah, maybe recency bias is getting us there a little bit. I was just curious, so I looked. Chad Ochocinco-Johnson has half of the Instagram followers of Joe Burrow. 1.9
It's not even
million
close.
versus 3.8 million. Yeah.
But Chad's got him on Twitter, but I think IG is more relevant than Twitter.
Does he have him on Twitter?
Chad does. Yeah. Burrow doesn't tweet. Burrow doesn't
No, he doesn't. That's true.
It's the thing. It's kind of he's still got the old uniform as his Twitter pick.
Yeah. It's funny. How many headbands are going to be sold in the Bengals Pro Shop in the next couple of weeks? All of them?
I think they're sold out, or they're going to be sold out. Yeah, I was thinking about it, man. We should get some. I don't know. We had the shirts with the lock on them. We'd do headbands with the lock. I could rock a headband while working out. I would do that.
For all of your voluptuous hair.
Race Joe Burrow.
Race Joe Burrow?
That'd be fun. He would whoop me, but that would be fun.
That would be fun.
I could beat some Bengals, not him. I don't think I'd beat him. He's a pretty good athlete.
He's a good athlete, and he's in great shape, as we've discussed.
Yeah. Hopefully. All right. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about that a little bit. That's how we started. He's visibly, and I'm not going to get into too much. It's the best shape I've ever seen him, including last year. When you talk about muscle definition, but I think it's all good weight. I think he's really coming into what he's going to look like as a professional quarterback. And that was part of the takeaway too from his, I think it was 16, 17-minute news conference, is he's been through the off seasons now a couple of times. And yeah, some of them were shaky. He had the ACL recovery last year. He went through the entire off season. It's just things went awry right as camp started. And so I think this year, this off season, he has a routine. He's upgraded a few things, updated some stuff, of course, training wise, but he's gotten into a rhythm, and he must just be eating chicken, Built Bars, and greens because he's eating healthy. He looks the best I've seen him.
He's got, I'm sure, a fantastic trainer. He mentioned him by name. His name's Dak, his trainer. I'm sure he has an excellent dietary regime going as well. And the thing that you hope that translates and parlays into is a full offseason. And right, we knock on wood, as Paul Dehner did when he asked Joe Burrow about it in his presser today.
Mm-hmm.
And Burrow acknowledged the importance of getting through the offseason and having that normal offseason and getting through training camp because he spends so much time refining and finding little weaknesses to improve. He talked about that as well. And if you lose time to rehab, to recovery from a surprise surgery, and you lose weight and you got to spend more time in the weight room, it's just taking time away from him doing other work, which he clearly does. Like, he does take some time away to decompress and everything. And he's talked about that in the past, but he spends so much time because of his work ethic and the kind of competitor he is working on improving various aspects of his game. He said they've been throwing for 2 weeks. He's been working on things in those sessions, right? He talked about using your imagination when you're working on air to get yourself prepared for game situations, certain defensive linemen winning in certain ways, having to throw from different arm slots, all these different kinds of things that he's been working on all offseason. And so getting to do that without interruption, without losing time, could only be good for a team that last year kind of stumbled out of the gates and can't really afford to do that again.
I agree. I think it's kind of wild looking back, and I've gone through my phone, and you bank stuff and you try to save stuff from each year, and then you clear space on your phone. And partially because Quinn is more important than Joe Burrow when it comes to my cell phone storage these days. And so I went back and I was going through some of the 2022 stuff, and it's crazy how different he looks. And it was a scramble drill, I think, to get ready for the start of the season last year. And it was a much more serious procedure than people realized in the moment. And he's a fighter, and he wasn't going to not play week 1 or week 2, but he's so much leaner than he is now, or was even towards the end of last season, obviously. But he's thicker now, and it's like good weight compared to last year, where I think it was let's get the weight on just so I can get through this year and
Mhm.
make it through. And so I am kind of curious to see the steps he takes. You know, there's some MVP hype, like you mentioned. Would not be shocked if he makes that push. But he talked about some other stuff. I think we should hit on what he said about Jonah Williams, Orlando Brown Jr. And so let's dive there. Let's go into that a bit coming up next.
Joe Burrow talked about what's going on with the Bengals offensive line, the excitement of bringing Orlando Brown Jr. into the building, Jonah Williams, a topic of conversation as well, James. And it's kind of the similar line to what he took with Jesse Bates last year on Jonah Williams in some ways. Really important to this team. Hope we have him here. We understand it's a business. We're going to support him either way. Speaks to the culture of the locker room, the closeness of some of these relationships, and at the same time, I think an awareness that he's probably going to be the right tackle this year, barring some unforeseen developments at this point.
Yeah. I think that's the part. Get on board now, because I would be surprised if it's Jackson Carman. I would be surprised if it's anyone but Jonah Williams, because they believe in Jonah. I talked to Ted Karras about it earlier this week on CBT, and same thing. Asked Joe a similar question, and he said, we love Jonah. Jonah's been a big part of our success the last couple of years, so hopefully we have him back. But business is business, and Jonah thinks, and whatever Jonah thinks is best for his career, what he's going to do will support him in whatever he decides. There's a lot of ways you could do that, but it's pretty much, hey, Jonah, I got your back. We hope you're back. And everyone else around has kind of pointed to him coming back. There was a report out there a few weeks ago, I think it was, saying that he planned on coming back for the mandatory mini camp. Ted Karras seemed to think that, and didn't say those exact words, but when I talked to him, I think Jonah is going to be back, is going to be at right tackle. And I think that's good. I think that's a good thing. Even if you're on Team Jackson Carman or Team La'el Collins, well, there's definitely some flaws in their game, whether it's health, inexperience, all of those things. So having Jonah around is not a bad thing, because he's, one, probably your best option. And even if you don't feel that way, he's another option that once upon a time in 2021 on the Super Bowl team was their best offensive lineman by far.
Yeah, I don't think that there's a world where Jonah being around is a bad thing. I think a lot of people, we've talked about this a few times, think that he's some awful, terrible offensive lineman now, which,
or that he's going to wreck the locker room because he doesn't want to play right tackle. Like, that's just not him. I mean, he played through a dislocated kneecap all year last year.
it's also not the locker room. Like, it's hard to imagine that happening in the current iteration of the Bengals locker room with the leadership they have in place, with the kind of way we've seen these relationships happen in the last few years. I mean, you've heard Orlando Brown talk about this too. I mean, all these newcomers talk about this stuff immediately, because it can be noise, right? Like, it can be, you can hear about this all the time. It can't just be talk. Like, yeah, we have a great locker room, we have great culture, we have all this stuff. Then you hear new guys getting there and they're like, oh yeah, I see what they were saying now. I haven't actually seen anything quite like this before. And that trust factor, while it is kind of an intangible thing where it's hard to quantify and all that stuff, hard to argue that it's not important and not a factor in how these guys have managed the success they've had in the last 2 years.
Agreed. I think that's the aspect of it where no one's going to be mad at Jonah for his request. And whether it's, and let's just say you hate Jonah, right? I'm saying Bengals fans, because there are some that just do not want him on the team.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the two biggest leaders on offense, and I think that's fair, Ted Karras, and I wrote an article about it too, but it's out there. Just check it out. If you're wondering what the hell I'm talking about. Ted Karras and Joe Burrow. So leader of the offensive line, and Joe Burrow, leader of the new world when it comes to Bengals football. Mm-hmm. They both say those things with Jonah. He's going to be welcomed back with open arms, and they're going to be like, hey, you are bothered, you're upset. Everyone's going to get it, because they would be upset in that position as well, but it's going to be time to get to work. And so I think when it's time, he'll get to work. Not that he's not working on his own. Tyler Boyd working on his own right now. worth noting. And so, yeah, I think Jonah's going to be just fine, and the Bengals are going to be better with him than without him.
Yeah, you mentioned Tyler Boyd. I agree with a lot of what you talked about there. Even if he's depth, like you could do so much worse for depth than I mean, how many times in the unlikely world where Jonah Williams is your swing tackle?
Oh,
I mean,
best swing tackle they've had ever, maybe.
Yeah, I mean,
maybe
you go back to Anthony Collins was a swing tackle. He was really good off the bench. That's the one that comes to mind for me.
Yeah.
Jonah's pretty easy to make the argument that he'd be better in that role.
And not ever. I don't go back in the history books and look, because the Bengals have had some good offensive lines, great tackle play. I'm not, but it would be a heck of a problem to have, right? And that's why Jonah comes back, Jackson pushes him for the job, or is the swing tackle. Lau gets a clean bill of health. All of those things. That's great.
And we'll need to see what happens with. There's a bit of a logjam there, money-wise, at the tackle position. So we'll need to see what happens there.
Everyone talks about restructures. I wonder if Lau says, man, I'd rather be here in this locker room, the staff that knows me, than go back out there where I'm not going to get paid anyway coming off of an ACL. You never know.
Yeah, we'll see what happens there. Speaking of Tyler Boyd, you mentioned he's working out on his own because he wasn't there today. I assume is why you bring that up, right?
Yep.
Also, the only other non-Jonah Williams, non-injured player who wasn't there, I think Terrell Basham was not present from what I've seen.
Holding out because they picked Myles Murphy. No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding.
Yeah, OTAs, optional stuff right now. But most of the team's there, which is also good news. There's some other interesting comments from T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, James. Do you want to get into those today?
Nah, I said we hold those. We talk about Uno. We talk about 5, not 85, because, I might be able to work on putting some clips together so you could actually hear their voices and not have me ad-lib those next show.
We'll hear from T. Higgins and Jamar Chase via their locker room. They were locker room interviews on Tuesday. Some interesting stuff on the contract. Joe Burrow's contract, T. Higgins' contract, Jamar Chase's goals, perhaps, for 2023. It's always fun to hear about Jamar's goals because his first goal, everyone remembers, was to break every record in the Bengals record books. And he's probably on his way. He has a great chance of doing that, the way his career has started and how young he is. But we'll get into those topics and more on tomorrow's show. That's going to do it for today's episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. As always, thanks for listening. Hoo day, and have a good one.